It's easy to think historians have captured every bit of history along the way, right? Sometimes we take it for granted. We assume that no one important has slipped through the cracks. But when you think about the work of history and how the loudest people often get the most attention, it's easy to understand how history and historians might miss something. Or someone. In the history of early Spokane, someone was missed for years, for decades. But not now. I'm Chuck King, and welcome to the King's Guide. On today's episode, we're exploring the life of Edward John Brickell, or E.J. Brickell, one of Spokane's early founders. The Lion in the Shadows is a recent book on E.J.'s life, written by his great-great-grandson, Jim Brickell. This book tells the story of how E.J. Brickell stood at the center of our city's humble beginnings. But don't take my word for it. Here's Jim Brickell in his own words.
A throng of people stood near the entrance of the Spokane Methodist Episcopal Tabernacle on Sunday, September 27, 1891. Inside, the church was packed, with standing room only, but it was not for the usual Sunday service. It was the largest funeral that Spokane had ever seen at that point in the city's history, the funeral of its first millionaire and wealthiest citizen. Although it was strongly proposed at the time of his death, his name today is not attached to any street, park, building, or other public feature of the city to which he contributed so much. It is found only in the crevices of history by scholars who look hard enough, and on a cemetery monument sufficiently imposing that the few passers-by will wonder who the fellow could have been to have put up such a chunk of stone. The fellow in question was my great-great-grandfather, Edward John Brickell. And for several years, with the help of Chuck King and several others, I have been researching his life. It had been said that his investments and entrepreneurship came at a critical time, when the first investors of Spokane Falls had exhausted their capital and almost lost their faith in the city. He came here with what we considered in those days a large sum of money, and by his vim and energy brought the city to life. No longer buried in newspapers and archives, the story of E.J. Brickell is now here, emerging from the shadows.
The book is available for purchase at kingsguidespokane.com, also available at Andy's Bookstore. In this episode's Vox Populi segment, we asked the people of Spokane about E.J. Brickell. Spokies ought to know about someone whose vim and energy brought the city to life, right? So we asked him. We want to know who arrived in Spokane with a large sum of money and by his vim and energy brought the city to life.
No idea.
I heard this before when I got here. I don't know his name.
Yep, no. Yeah, I know who that is.
Yeah,
that's the Rockefellers.
Henry
Ford.
Jesse James actually came here in 1896 with wads of cash and started the whole place. It was amazing. Came on a railroad.
Nope. The person whose vim and energy brought the city to life was, of course, E.J. Brickell. These words were said of Brickell by another founder, Anthony Cannon, on the occasion of Brickell's death in 1891. In fairness, though, many people had trouble naming any city founder.
I don't know any.
Although some people tried pretty hard to come up with something.
Milton Berle actually started the grassroots effort of the South Hill.
Nope. No. Others, however, did a great job giving credit to the Spokane tribe as the original people of our region.
Ooh.
Chief.
Who? Chief Spokane.
Oh, there you go.
Chief Gary.
Any founder of Spokane, I say Native Indians.
The Brickell name is familiar enough that when people were asked if they'd been in the Brickell building recently, many people had to think twice.
Brickell building?
Yeah.
We never been in Brickell building.
Last time Edie asked me was maybe 3 years ago, so Edie Brickell. invited me. It's very gracious of her birthday party.
It's got to have been at least, I don't remember if I'm thinking of the right building.
Downtown? There's a creamery there now. Probably.
Is that on the lower South Hill?
I think the Brickell building was torn down.
I think they made a parking lot out of it.
I think so.
The good news is, the Brickell building was not made into a surface-level parking lot like so many Spokane buildings. The bad news is, there was never a Brickell building. But what about the Brickell name? Jim pronounces it Brickell.
Edward John Brickell.
We visited E.J. Brickell's great-great-granddaughter, Iris Cantlon, to ask her about the name. Iris is also Jim Brickell's sister.
That's always been a question. My grandparents pronounced it Brickell. And you know, there's a couple famous people, Edie Brickell and Beth Brickell.
We also asked Iris why she thought her great-great-grandfather wasn't remembered better over the years.
Well, you know, there was no street named after him. There was no housing development named after him. But, you know, when he had a lot of businesses, he owned a lot of things, but he never put his name on them. And it's been funny because throughout our history in the family, it's always like, don't draw attention to yourself. Don't brag about yourself. You know, and I think that he just thought that his works could stand for themselves, you know?
At E.J. Brickell's funeral, the Reverend W.C. Gray remarked that E.J. had no desire for display and cared little for ceremonies. On today's show, we'll be visiting several places significant to E.J.'s life in Spokane, and we'll be driven along the way in Jim Dormaier's '56 Chevy Bel Air. Jim is a member of the local Hassey Car Club.
This is a 1956 Chevrolet Bel Air Sport Coupe model. Pretty much all original. What you see is kind of what came out of the factory. We bought this car in 1966 in Oakland, California. I was down there serving in the military, been drafted. So I said, I'll give you $100 more for that car than the dealer's giving you. So the next day on the way home from work, I was in uniform and I stopped to pick the car up. He says, oh, you're in uniform. He said, keep the $100. And so we got it for $305.
Beat the Chevrolet.
Brand new off the lot, a 1956 Chevy Bel Air usually sold for about $2,200. But today, a restored Chevy could fetch tens of thousands. Advertising campaigns for the Bel Air called it the hot one.
For 56, the hot one's even hotter.
And steering the Bel Air was so easy, they claimed, that apparently it could be done with your feet. Huh. Back in the 50s, some people liked to take their Bel Air off some sweet jumps. I think most people preferred to take the Bel Air on road trips.
We went on a tour through Montana with 19 other cars.
Wow.
And ran about 1,700 miles with it. Never used a drop oil, never failed to run. Got about 21 miles a gallon with it. Just kind of unbelievable how well it performs.
Well, it's a lot better than driving like a Model T. That's for sure. It is.
Yeah.
It's definitely a step up from that.
We've got a couple of older cars like that too.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Gotcha. Yeah. You wouldn't want to take that to Montana, probably.
Down the driveway and back.
Oh, right. Yeah. To a show and through the parking lot.
There you go.
And yet, if you get into the back seat of a Model A Ford, there's all kinds of room back there. Because they don't take it up to the trunk.
Right.
So it's been a reliable old hobby car. Gets some good thumbs up once in a while.
Oh yeah.
Nice car.
Thank you.
Nice car.
Thank you.
Slick ride, gentlemen.
55 Chevy?
56.
56.
Yep.
Okay. So you guys are parked. You're going to be a ticket.
Yeah. We're going to be moving shortly. By the time you get your pen out.
$100 a minute. This is the price. Okay. I thought you guys were going to have a car gathering.
Nope. This is the only one.
Just putting the beard on and then going up there.
Oh, well, that's a real beard. Yeah.
I forget I have it half the time.
Our first stop of the day was on Peone Prairie, and this little farmhouse on the corner of Peone and Bruce. At one time, E.J. Brickell and his family members owned a substantial amount of property on Peone Prairie, thousands of acres. and the Brickell family donated an acre here on the corner for a church. Jim Brickell and I spoke with the owners for a few minutes.
Hopefully they're here.
Hello, how are you? Okay. All right. Hey, we thought we'd come by and introduce you to Jim Brickell.
How do you do?
The Peon Methodist Church worshipped here on the corner until the mid-1920s. Around 1939, it became the Peon Grange, and then in 1994, it became a house.
And then just across Peon Road, there was another acre that my great-grandfather donated for the school district. So there was a schoolhouse over there too.
Oh, is that right? Yeah. Oh, okay. So they hauled it down there?
Yeah.
Not too far from here, E.J.'s son had a homestead and farm, and the family often gathered at the Marshall residence, shown in this 1886 photo that includes a variety of Brickell and Marshall family members. From here, we're headed downtown where E.J. Brickell spent most of his time getting the city of Spokane up and running. But yeah, look at that. Isn't that crazy?
You know, I have never seen this much traffic here. It's, it never used to be.
These people will let up.
So Jim, what brought E.J. here?
A.M. Cannon and J.J. Brown came in 1878 and bought a share of J.N. Glover's property at Spokane Falls, an undivided half share between the two of them. Cannon realized that without any capital, and he didn't have any, Brown didn't have any, Glover didn't have any, that without capital, things were not going to develop here.
Anthony Cannon, for whom Cannon Hill Park is named, went to Truckee, California, where E.J. Brickell lived at the time, and invited him to Spokane.
According to Joe Ferris, E.J. first came here in 1880, and he thought there was a lot of promise here, particularly in the water power, and he could see the potential in Spokane Falls.
E.J. Brickell first visited Spokane in 1880, but he moved here in 1883 and immediately took center stage in the development of the city.
He also joined with Cannon in converting the old sawmill that had been here for 20 years into a company called Spokane Falls Lumber and Manufacturing Company. Then in 1886 they rebuilt the sawmill, the sash and door factory, entirely new, Spokane Mill Company.
We're in the vicinity of the Spokane Mill Company. This is part of the mill pond where the logs were floated down, and this whole area here was a huge complex. The Spokane Mill Company was Spokane's largest employer at the time.
They incorporated Host's old sawmill, which E.J. had purchased in 1885.
The flour mill?
The flour mill.
Yeah.
What did I say? Sawmill?
You said sawmill, yeah.
Well, I meant flour mill. And they converted from a grist mill to a roller mill, which was the more up-to-date and efficient way to produce flour. Well, at about the same time, late 1885, E.J. and some others started the Traders National Bank.
The Traders National Bank stood here on the corner of Howard and Riverside, where the Bank of America Plaza is today. Traders National Bank was the third bank in town and the largest at the time.
E.J. was president, and a fellow named Jacob Hoover was the cashier. And the cashier of a bank was a pretty important job, apparently, in those days. Now, you go in as a teller, and they're not very high in the ranks of the bank, but the cashier was.
In addition to being president of the Traders National Bank and the Spokane Mill Company, he was also president of Holly Mason and Marks, the largest hardware store in town, which once stood here on Howard and Main. Later, the store became the Pantages Theater and then the Orpheum. In the early 1920s, Bing Crosby and Al Rinker performed here with their band, the Musical Laters. E.J. Brickell was also president of the Spokane Cracker Company, the Spokane Bottling Company, Spokane Falls Water Power Company, Baum & Company, Old Dominion Mining, and Columbia Mining, and the Security Loan and Trust Company. E.J.'s companies own most of the land we know today as Riverfront Park. We're here at the skate ribbon, and right over in this area was a big rock formation, and the newspapers called it Brickell's Mountain. Sinhumina Island was once known as Brickell Island, long before it became Canada Island for Expo 74. During the 1880s, E.J. Brickell presided over most of Spokane's biggest industries. He didn't put his name on any of these companies, but nevertheless, he was easily the biggest man in town.
This picture hung in the bank, the Traders National Bank that he established. When my granddaughter was little, it hung over Joanne and Carl's fireplace, and she didn't like it. It frightened her because she thought he was looking at her.
Apparently, E.J. didn't like being photographed, which may also have contributed to his quiet place in history.
And my aunt, they had this picture for years, and she used to say she was going to turn it into a coffee table. So we just kind of had this inside joke that, yeah, we're going to turn it into a coffee table someday.
The other known photo of E.J. was taken in Truckee, California, sometime in the 1870s.
It showed a bunch of guys that had been betting on politics. And it was the Whigs against somebody else, I don't recall who. And I guess if you lost, you had to push somebody in a wheelbarrow. And it shows E.J., who lost, was pushing somebody in a wheelbarrow. He was really very tough. And you know, one of the things about him was he wasn't afraid of failure. You know, most of us are afraid to try new things because we don't want to look stupid and we don't want to fail, but I don't think it bothered him at all. I think if it didn't work, thought of some other way to make it work.
E.J. Brickell developed his toughness as a young man who left home to seek his fortune at the age of 14, all the way back in 1834. By 1849, he was married and headed west during the gold rush. I went back to my old stomping grounds, West Valley High School, to check with history teachers Ty Brown and Ned Fadeley. They're here to help us review the 3 basic ways people migrated west in the 1800s.
So, in the middle of the 19th century, immigrants to the West Coast in California had 3 basic options. Their first option was to travel overland from the Midwest, from Missouri, across the plains, and across the mountains to the gold fields in San Francisco.
Okay, so Route 2 would be more than likely, if you're coming from Illinois, you'd go down the Mississippi River through New Orleans, and then around, down South America, Cape Horn, Straits of Magellan, up around the west coast of South America, North America to San Francisco.
And the third and most efficient, expensive option would be to travel down the Mississippi River to New Orleans, book passage to the Isthmus of Panama, cross the Isthmus of Panama by dugout canoe, mule, and on foot, and then hopefully catch a steamer up the west coast of Central America and Mexico to San Francisco.
E.J. was in a hurry to get west, so he took the fastest, most expensive route to California.
He decides to come down the Mississippi River, but instead of going all the way down around the Horn, he decides to book passage across the Isthmus.
Well, time is of the essence, because Brickell leaves Illinois to seek his fortune in the gold fields along the American River in 1849, which is already a year into the gold rush. In reality, people living in the continental United States and on the East Coast and in Europe were at a disadvantage because there were no telegraph lines. So the first people to hear about the gold fields in California were actually folks in Hawaii, Mexican miners, particularly from Sonora, and then folks that were already living on the West Coast and in Oregon. So by the time Brickell has an opportunity to leave the Midwest and race across this Isthmus of Panama to the gold fields in California, he's already a year behind. So it must have been worth it for him to pay the extra money to get there as quickly as possible before all the good claims had been snapped up and he missed his moment.
All the routes west were dangerous, and the Isthmus of Panama presented unique dangers, including tropical diseases like malaria, cholera, and dysentery. But the Isthmus of Panama also had the advantage of being like a jungle cruise.
They tried to spin it like, even though it was the most dangerous route,
yeah, there you go.
And even though it was very expensive, the folks doing this had a world of adventure that they would never be able to see anyplace else. Even their ancestors that came across from Europe to the New World didn't see what they saw when they went across the Isthmus of Panama. Jaguars howling at night, monkeys in the trees, colorful birds, all sorts of just exotic creatures and things that they would never be able to see, and it was worth the effort to do that.
Of the Isthmus of Panama, Ulysses S. Grant once wrote, "The horrors of the road in the rainy season are beyond description." Here in Spokane, much of the land we know today as Riverfront Park was owned either by E.J. Brickell directly or by companies where he was president. One of the properties E.J. owned included the land where the flour mill sits today.
Well, it was the Spokane Falls Water Power Company, of which he was president. But one book, well, was Early Birds in the Northwest, Bond's book. He says that it was Cannon and others. Yeah, Cannon was involved. He was the vice president of the company. So it was Cannon and others. But E.J. was the president of the company. You know, it's interesting that a great many history books, they're full of Cannon, Brown, and Glover, and certain other people, but they don't mention old E.J. at all.
You guys come down to Expo 74 when I was here?
Yep.
Yeah, we did too. We had season passes every night. It seemed like we came in here and had such a good time.
Yep. It's quite a deal for the city to put all that together. I mean,
it was great.
Yeah, it was. That used to be the Monkey Ward's building.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. This is the old Montgomery Ward building. Some people called it the Monkey Ward building. The Montgomery Ward building in Spokane opened in 1929, and today it's now City Hall. Most of this land also belonged at one time to E.J. Brickell, who sold it to the Washington Water Power Company in 1889.
Remember the rotating, revolving door?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I'd want to go around and around, and my great aunt would say, here, cut that out.
The book on E.J. Brickell, The Lion in the Shadows, was published in 2018. It all started back in 2009 when one day I went to visit Iris Cantlon, unannounced.
It all started when Chuck showed up on my doorstep one day.
I'm going to go see Iris.
And I didn't know who he was. And he started asking me questions. He asked me if I knew, if I was related to E.J. Brickell. Hello.
Hello, are you related to E.J. Brickell?
Yes. And then he started giving me all these facts.
Did you know he was Spokane's first millionaire?
There's no money here. Bye. And he said he had found me by going up on Ancestry. So I thought if I invite him in, I don't know who he is, my daughter will kill me. So I made him come back when my brother could be here, and then would coerce Chuck and Jim into writing the book.
Jim Brickell and I completed the book after several years of researching E.J. Brickell's life and the incredible contributions he made to the city of Spokane. In addition to going quietly about his business and city life, he was a very generous but quiet philanthropist as well.
He was always willing to help other people, but he didn't just give them a handout. He would help them find work. He had a niece that came to Spokane, and he helped set her up in a laundry business. You know, so he was willing to help out, but you needed to put some elbow grease into it too. E.J.
Brickell was instrumental in getting funding for Spokane during the recovery from the Great Fire. He was also behind the Great Hardware Train, which brought millions of dollars in supplies and raw materials needed to rebuild Spokane. At the time of the Seattle fire, Brickell was among the first to offer financial assistance, and in his obituary, he was remembered as someone whose purse was open to those in distress. Someone had told me many years ago that he was a real softy when it came to his family, but that he could be really tough in business. You're probably familiar with the Campbell House or the Patsy Clark Mansion, but E.J. Brickell never built a grand mansion in Spokane. This could be another reason why he was not more remembered. At one point, E.J. did build a modest home, but towards the end of his life, he lived in an apartment above the Traders National Bank. He had an apartment up on the top floor. It had all the conveniences and everything he needed, but I don't think he was opulent. You know, because I don't think he was that kind of guy. By that time, he was by himself. His wife had died. And so, you know, a mansion wasn't that important to him. At the time of his death, though, nearly all of Spokane showed up to pay their respects. The funeral procession was the largest in the city's history up to that point, over a mile long, and likely rivals any procession since.
That was for the Traders National Bank.
That's right. Yeah, right there.
Yep.
So they left from here and they came back by it. The services for E.J. Brickell were held at the Methodist Episcopal Tabernacle near the intersection of 3rd Avenue and Howard. The funeral procession headed from there to Greenwood Cemetery, which E.J. helped to establish just 3 years before he died. And we're not really sure if they actually went down Riverside or not, but it makes more sense.
Well, it makes more sense because that's probably the way they went down to cemetery.
Yeah, that's right. Yep. There was 68 carriages, and it said as many more joined in line. So it was probably 120 vehicles, over a mile in length.
Really?
Yeah, the most imposing funeral ever in the city.
And what year was that again?
1891.
1891.
Yeah.
That's what he said.
One of the reasons for EJ's success was that he collaborated and recruited others to become part of the enterprise, even if he could have accomplished his goals on his own.
There were a number of things that he could have done single-handedly that he didn't. He involved other people. And he could have pretty well financed the Traders National Bank himself. But there were other shareholders. The thing about it is that often those shareholders became employees of the business. Well, an employee that owns part of the business is probably going to be a lot better worker than one that just gets paid 30 cents an hour or something.
Many of these people E.J. Brickell brought along with him in business were pallbearers at his funeral. The list reads like a who's who of Spokane founders, including James Glover, Anthony Cannon, John J. Brown, Michael M. Cowley, Daniel Drumheller, and more.
As a man, he was always charitable, and no deserving person ever left his door as poor as when they entered. I have known him ever since he settled in Spokane, and he has always evinced a fair, unselfish, and manly spirit. To my knowledge, this battle with grim death is the only one he ever lost.
To learn more about E.J. Brickell, get your hands on Lion in the Shadows, written by his great-great-grandson, Jim Brickell. Available at Auntie's Bookstore in downtown Spokane or online at kingsguidespokane.com.
Now the story of two local history nuts who love making frequent local history programs. One of them helped found the Spokane Valley Heritage Museum, but also worked full-time in a local meatpacking facility.
I just retired. I'm never coming back.
The other is a former publisher of Nostalgia magazine, and at the start of the pandemic, he became the city's worst Uber Eats driver.
Hey, wait. Is this your customer's food?
It was.
Whoops.
Together, they produced The King's Guide, or Chuck King's Guide to Spokane History. In their first season of shows, The King's Guide featured all kinds of stories about local pioneers, engineers, racketeers, mountaineers, and maybe a few jerks and weirdos. Their second season is even more ambitious than the first. Every episode of Season 2 will feature a different classic car, owned and driven by a local collector. You can keep Chuck King out on the streets by supporting The King's Guide on Patreon. Your support is essential for The King's Guide to continue. Learn more at kingsguidespokane.com. It's The King's Guide, or Chuck King's Guide to Spokane History.
Passing by, but you started something. I may never know why, but you started something with your glance. A new romance was in the making. Just like the sun starts the flowers to waking.